Okie dokie, welcome back. So today I received an update from Bill English following his visit to China last week. I was interested in his take on China's economic outlook in light of recent events, including the fall in dairy prices and volatile Chinese share prices. Bill said that business leaders he met, including some from New Zealand operating in China, remained reasonably positive. He heard about emerging skills shortages in the cities and rising agricultural wages. He saw evidence of spare capacity in underused residential and commercial buildings. But overall, Bill came out of China a bit more positive than when he arrived. So here in New Zealand, we need to keep things in perspective and not needlessly talk ourselves into a gloomy mindset. Sure, global factors like dairy prices and uncertainties in China and Greece are risks for New Zealand, but there are always risks around the world. What matters is our own resilience. We've shown, by the way, we've recovered from the global financial crisis and how we're rebuilding Christchurch, that as a country we're resilient. And let's remember, we export a range of goods and services to a whole range of countries. Many of those exports are doing extremely well. Tourism, for example, is growing strongly. In the last year, a record 3 million overseas visitors came to New Zealand, up 7% on the previous year. Other primary industries are also doing well, as is high-tech manufacturing and construction. Just last month, the Reserve Bank forecast showed the economy is growing at around about 3% and will do for the next few years in their view. That's despite them factoring in a significant fall in dairy prices. Growth may come in a bit lower than that in light of more recent events, but the New Zealand economy is still growing at a respectable rate. And there are factors at play supporting our economy. The Kiwi dollar has fallen by around about 25% against the US in the past year. It's fallen further and faster than anticipated in various scenarios in the budget update a couple of months ago, and that's providing a lot of help and support for exporters. Lower interest rates will also support exporters and the economy as a whole. The government is mindful of the global risks I've mentioned, but it's important not to overstate them, as our opponents often like to do. The economy is more resilient than it was 6 or 7 years ago. Households are savings, our banks and financial institutions are in better shape, and businesses have stronger balance sheets and are growing and creating new jobs. And the government continues to support the economy with billions of dollars of infrastructure investment, including broadband, roads, rails, schools, hospitals, irrigation and rebuilding Christchurch, of course. So we should back ourselves to meet these latest challenges. Just in terms of the House this week, the government intends to begin the estimates debate and progress a number of first readings on the order paper. As you know, of course, Wednesday is a Members' Day. As for my movements, I'll be here and in Wellington for the remainder of today, tomorrow, and of course Wednesday. On Thursday, I'm travelling to Hamilton for a number of visits. We'll be in Auckland on Friday, and as some of you may have the pleasure of doing, we'll be at the National Party Conference in the weekend, so look forward to welcoming you there. No, I think, look, the Reserve Bank has the unenviable task sometimes of having a single instrument like interest rates and trying to balance that across varying different factors and parts of the economy. But overall, they take all of those factors into consideration. And, we've had, pretty low interest rates now for a very long period of time, actually. So homeowners have enjoyed those interest rates. And, the good news is they're likely to have lower interest rates for longer. So for people who have a mortgage or are going to potentially establish one, it's a good news story.
What about those October 1 regulations, the bright line test, the 30% deposit for investors? That can rein things in a bit?
I think it's likely, in our view, the combination of what the Reserve Bank will be doing around LVR restrictions for investment properties in Auckland and the Bright Line test and others, that will all help, as indeed will be a withholding tax if that's what we ultimately establish for foreign buyers. Certainly the register in terms of the registration of a New Zealand bank account and ultimately having to basically register those ownerships of non-tax residents. All of those things are likely to help. But look, in the end, the biggest thing we back ourselves on is supply. We've got the most construction activity happening now in a decade. And if you look at Christchurch, it's quite an interesting example. I mean, they were, that city had fast rising house prices and rising rents. You've now got a scenario where supply has started to meet the demand. Prices in housing are not going up strongly, and in fact rents are starting to fall. So we still back ourselves as supply being the main way through.
Promise at the moment is that, as you know, $32,000 house shortfall
Yep.
in terms of the available houses. Nick Smith said at the weekend that he believes the government will lower that
Yep.
by the election to make it less than.
Sure.
Do you agree that that will happen, that you will lower that housing shortfall?
Well, I think his main argument, I didn't actually see the interview, but I think the main way that has been calculated was on what was the previous run rate versus what the anticipated demand was. And as part of the response through special housing areas and the consenting process that we're going through with Auckland Council, that is ramping up quite rapidly. So yes, I would agree with the view that we'd be able to close that gap. We've got to continue to work on that, and we've got to continue to make sure that Auckland Council stay locked at the hip with us to issue those consents and get that building activity undertaken. Well, I haven't seen all of their analysis, and it depends on so many different factors, as we know. So there's that's part of it. But overall, the government's aim has been to say, okay, how do we lift the run rate of construction and consenting in Auckland? Since we've made the announcements to try and address that, which has been special housing areas, it'll soon be the release of government land, all of those things. What is true is we have actually increased the activity considerably, and I think there's more gains we can make. I don't think there's any confusion. There's a bill in the House, and essentially what's going to happen is from October 1, we will gather information about non-resident taxpayers, and that will give us, much better information than we had. As I think I said in the past, we won't have perfect information about the individuals per se, because some of them may be New Zealanders who are living overseas and who purchase a property. They'll still be a non-resident tax purpose, so for those purposes they'll show up, but they're New Zealanders. It would be no different if you went overseas and spent a few years overseas and bought a house. But we will have perfect information, if you like, about the number of non-resident taxpayers. What we're going through at the moment, and what we've been consulting on, is what that information will look like. So we're going through a process of trying to work out, okay, how granulated can we get it? How much can we break that information down? Can we share that information, for instance? All of those logical things. I'm actually confident we're going to get to a point where we will be able to share the information. It should be broken down by the categories that you would expect. My estimate is that in places like the United Kingdom and Australia, the information will be a bit polluted, if you like, by New Zealanders who live over there, who may well be returning at some point and decide to buy a property in New Zealand, because there's a lot more New Zealanders living in Australia and the UK. In a place like China, for instance, which has been topical last week, there's a hell of a lot less New Zealanders that actually live in China. So, we would, I think, look at the non-resident tax data out of China and be able to make an assessment that the vast bulk of those probably would not be New Zealanders who are living overseas. There'll be some who are living in China who buy a property here, but less, say, than a market like the United Kingdom.
Why not add some kind of provision that allows us to determine whether or not it is a New Zealand or
Yeah, so it gets this, and this is where it's really important to sort of work your way through the data, and you guys will have to go and do that. But there are lots of complications with all of these things. So for instance, you could ask a million questions. Is it a person who's a non-resident for tax purposes, who's buying a property? Theoretically, they don't have a connection, but they're intending to come to New Zealand, are likely to get residency, and will one day maybe get citizenship. Are they buying because their children are studying in New Zealand? If they buy and then on-sell that property to another New Zealander, does that, that doesn't necessarily show up? So there are a range of things, are they? And yeah, you could do potentially, but there are from what I can see, there are lots of different complicating factors with that. I think what is important to get is who are the non-resident, basically taxpayers that are doing this, and that will give us better information. But that's likely to be where we're going. I don't know whether we need a clause or whether there will be one. They're working their way through that. But it would be my expectation that having gathered that information on a regular basis, it'll be released.
Is it going to give any indication about how much property each person is actually buying?
Again, I don't have those details at the moment, but it is possible that the person, the mythical person living in this country who fits this criteria, they could be buying. I think you will get a demarcation between whether they buy, for instance, land that involves a commercial property, land that might be farmland, certainly land that would be for residential purposes. It won't necessarily say that, Mr. X has bought 15 different properties, but it will show, I think, that there's been 15 purchases, I think.
Isn't it relevant though in terms of the information that you're hoping to get in terms of the percentage or the actual impact on how much property, not just how many people?
Well, you appreciate that they're going through that consultation process at the moment and they're working their way through what should be reported. So all I can give you is a flavour for what I think it will broadly look like, but you can't hold me to account to it because in the end I don't know at this point. I haven't seen that officially yet and they haven't reported back to me. But it sort of strikes me, if you look at the debate that's sort of there, I think people are interested in saying, broadly speaking, how much of the property that is sold at any one time in any one given month from a residential perspective is being sold to non-resident taxpayers. And once they get a sense of that, they'll have a sense of the scale of the issue. As I said in my morning media this morning, we've been a pretty pragmatic government. If we think we need to take steps to address an issue which we see of coming great concern, we're prepared to look at that. I will say, though, that the only country that I can really look at that's actually had a ban, for instance, on foreigners buying property other than new property is Australia, and it's been spectacularly unsuccessful. It certainly hasn't stopped property prices going up. So better information will help the debate. Happy to have that better information, but it is just a snapshot in time, and it's not a register. It's not a perfect scenario. When someone moves address or sells to someone else, it's not constantly updated.
So how quickly will the data be out? Because it will basically track through maybe. So how?
I honestly don't know, but as soon as we start gathering data, I think from October 1, as soon as we start gathering that data, the monthly kind of intervals or something would be logical. Yeah, within reason, probably.
Do you not accept the argument, and in Australia they argue that by preventing foreign investment by existing homes, that by allowing them to build new homes, that can take pressure off house prices. You're actually building supply while not actually increasing demand.
Okay, so it can be a factor that helps. There's no question, because when we did Homestart, for instance, we tried to factor that so you got a bigger grant if you bought a newer property, to do exactly that and encourage people to match up. Those who want to develop those properties with a buying base, if you like. So that can help. But this is where it gets a little bit more challenging. I mean, first start off, there are probably lots of ways to get around it, and that's unfortunately what the Australians have found. Establish a domestic company. There's a million sort of rules there. The second problem that you can have is, would you want that everywhere? So, for instance, do we care about a non-resident taxpayer buying an existing property in Queenstown or the Bay of Islands or Masterton? I mean, is it an issue in Wellington, where Wellington house prices are not going up dramatically? So if you want to make the argument that, say, for instance, a non-resident taxpayer is buying a house in Auckland, for instance, and it's an existing property, if that's been sold to a New Zealander who remains in New Zealand, then that person's got limited options, don't they? But they do have to find alternative accommodation. They may well, if you go through the chain, ultimately somebody's going to buy another property that's new, or by definition you run out of properties. Well, as you will have seen, the Minister's announced that there's going to be a review, and that review will identify the prison or prisons involved, whether it's a SERCO prison for sure, how widespread the issue is, and whether they've breached any of their contract. So before they, I wouldn't want to comment until they actually undertake the review. I would simply say that one big advantage we have with SERCO and privately run prisons is we do have clauses within the contract that well and truly allow us to take action if that is justified and required. Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about it because, in the end, we have a duty of care, I would have thought, as the government, to make sure that people are safe in prisons as best we possibly can. So I don't know the circumstances behind or how widespread it is or where it's actually happening, but we want to get to the bottom of it. And it's quite a thorough process. I mean, there'll be the review. The Ombudsman's office will play a role because they play a role in these areas. Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is let's just understand whether they've breached their contract. Let's understand fully whether it's them, how widespread it is, and if they have, what penalties we can actually impose under the contract. I know there's certainly financial penalties. Yeah, so I was advised last night by the Minister's office that there may have been an earlier report and that, and so that was the only information I had. I haven't seen the report. I don't know how high up the food chain it went. And, I think there are being questions asked now about how high it went and ultimately whether action should have been taken to bring it to the attention of senior management if it wasn't. But in the end, we'll need to get some answers to that. I don't have those today. Well, let's understand, ultimately we'd need to see the report, what it said and who it was raised with. We don't know that yet. Yeah, I would have thought that's a pretty serious issue if it's spelt out black and white like that. But again, I just haven't seen the report and I don't know where it went. Well, I just don't know. I mean, I can't, I know there's speculation. I know people are saying, I've only really seen the video footage. I don't know how much of it's going around, but I saw it on the Radio New Zealand site this morning. I haven't seen any other footage of that. So I just can't be sure that it's exactly that prison or there aren't other prisons involved. I just simply don't know.
Are you worried that the looming regulation is spiking the demand?
Oh, you mean the bright line test and things?
In the Reserve Bank?
No, I don't worry about that because one of the issues is that it's really important for taxpayers to understand that the bright line test takes away ambiguity when it comes to purchasing investment properties for that 2-year period. It does not take people, doesn't fundamentally change the law per se. It's an intent-based test. So, for instance, if you bought a property today and it was an investment-based property, that will be on the radar screen of IRD. So if people think they're going to beat the rules by buying today before the bright line test comes in, they might be in for an awfully nasty shock when they get a knock on the door from an IRD tax inspector.
Sort of reports that there's a spike in demand. It suggests that there's bubble-like behaviour.
Well, some people might. There's a number of factors. So some people might take the view that would exclude them from the tax net, but it's because they have an ignorance about the current laws, and I can't stop that. Secondly, housing, in particular Auckland housing, has been a topic of considerable debate. Some people, in my view, will be quite misguided in believing that's a one-way bet. There were also people when the dairy payout was $8.40 who said it would go up forever and never go down. Markets go up and markets come down.
Would you be comfortable with the Reserve Bank implementing another round of restrictions and ultimately these factors suggested that might be necessary early next year if you don't get things to pull off?
Well, it's been a constructive working relationship between the Minister of Finance's office and the Reserve Bank. He hasn't raised with me that the Governor's raised any further issues with him, but let's wait and see. We always have an open dialogue with the Governor.
Are you worried about the international trend? I mean, we've seen it in Vancouver and Singapore and Australia, and now there's this debate in New Zealand. Are you worried about the trend of Chinese capital leaving China? In fact, they could accelerate when they change their regulations.
Well, what's happening, I think, in China is that you have got a very large economy which has been performing for the most part extremely well, and it's generating a lot of capital. And it's natural that capital diversifies a bit. It's true in New Zealand. I mean, New Zealanders create capital, and sometimes that capital is diversified into other international markets. So if China's economy continues to grow, continues to get larger, will there be more diversification? I would say yes, that's likely to happen. And because those numbers are large, that can have some influence around the world. Will it all migrate to New Zealand? I think the answer to that's no.
Well, I wasn't asking if it will all migrate here, just are you concerned about the impact of the money that does migrate?
Well, some of the money, if you looked at, there's different categories, of course, and I don't have the most recent data, but I'm sure we can get it for you. But the last time I looked at the amount of foreign capital investment out of China into the New Zealand economy, it was much, much lower than, say, for instance, Australia or the United Kingdom or the United States. China hasn't been a massive investor here. So rather than be worried, in some instances, we'd welcome that. So when Ely and Yashili decide to set up dairy factories in New Zealand and pump hundreds of millions of dollars into building those, I think they were welcomed. So it depends where that capital is going, what it's doing. I mean, you've got some very large investment going into Auckland real estate, but not necessarily into housing markets, but into the big tower in downtown Auckland or the hotel that's been built. I would have thought that's welcomed. Yeah, okay, so about half an hour ago, I got made aware that there was likely to be a story run that they may well have been served kiruru. The ministers in question, if they were completely unaware of that. Whether they actually consumed it, given they didn't know that it was kiruru, I'm sure they can't remember what they ate 2 years ago. I don't think you can say they actually ate it, but it's quite. If the marae is saying they served it, they would certainly know. But like, as all of you will know, when you go to a marae, usually it's communal sort of dining with lots of different dishes put in the middle, some of which people eat and some of which they don't, ranging from crayfish to kiruru to chops to a whole bunch of other things. So you can't say that they actually ate it, but they may well have been served it. If they were, then the marae will be in breach of the current rules and the law. But I don't have any backstory of whether they got it from DOC or whatever. My understanding is DOC's had a relationship with various iwi around the use of feathers and things for if there's roadkill. But outside of that, I don't think they've given authority for kiruru to be served. But you need to ask DOC. I just don't have those details. Well, they'd be in breach of the law in the same way that, effectively sunny toas. I would have thought if they've authorised that, you'd have to check legally whether they'd be in breach of the law. Certainly the marae would be, but we'd have to work out under what conditions they did that. But in terms of the ministers, all I can say is, people turn up to maraes, people serve food. They certainly weren't aware of it, and whether they consumed it, it's a very different issue. Well, that's the advice I've been given. I don't know if it's on the agenda. You need to ask the Foreign Minister's Office, but certainly New Zealand's been supportive of the view that there should be further work. Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Local government in New Zealand wants to look at charging rates on ground land.
Yeah. Look, it's a long-standing issue. I can't say it will never happen, but historically, for very good reasons, it hasn't. But it is an issue that local government raises with us.
So do you see reasons why it should?
There's a variety of different reasons historically why rates haven't been paid on Crown land. Probably somewhat to do with the two-way nature of the relationship between central and local government and the services that provides. So whether that's certainly there's been no suggestion on our side that is likely to change today, but we're certainly aware of the requests from local government, and we've been certainly aware of the work they've been doing around their own funding and how that might work. I mean, it's also true for an issue for a lot of Maori land, for instance, that rates aren't paid on. And that's one of the reasons we've been keen to obviously progress the Te Tui Whenua Māori reform that we've been doing, because we think that will make that land productive and far more likely that rates would be paid there for councils.
Almost on another regional council issue, Mark Solomon, in terms of fresh water,
Yep.
that affected in terms of the arrangement said that they weren't looking for ownership rights or financial payment, but were happy along the line of seats or appointments essentially next to the regional council, specific waterways,
Well, I don't think we would be suggesting there's some wholesale change to governance structures around waterways, but on a case-by-case basis, sometimes it makes sense for there to be that sort of role played by Māori, and the Waikato River is a great example of where that's already taken place. So they are a logical and genuine stakeholder, and we have those discussions with them catchment by catchment and sort of regional council by regional council. But it's not something we're looking to implement as a wholesale standard, Maori seats type of argument, if you like, for those catchments around the country.
But you would be prepared to have appointed Kiwi representatives alongside democratically.
Well, historically, that has happened, but where it's been extremely logical to do so. So in Christchurch, Ngāi Tahu's a pretty big partner. We work with them closely on lots of different issues, and sometimes they have had formal input into various different catchments. I can't rule that out, but it just depends on the circumstances. Sorry, one more time? Oh, right. Okay. Look, that's just solely a matter for her.